Welcome to the November 12th, 2020 meeting of the Tallahassee Historical Society. For those, yes.
Let's just give people a chance to come on in.
All right. How long should I wait?
Well, I think we have about 40 plus people registered, and right now the 8 people have signed in. So let's just give them a couple more minutes.
That's fine. I'll just wait for you to give me the go.
Okay. So everyone, welcome. As Bob was saying, we're so glad you can join us. We're giving everyone a chance to sign on, and we'll be starting momentarily. As you join us, I hope you'll look carefully at Bob's screen. In addition to the fact that he's very well groomed today, he's got some great memorabilia in the background. That's not his screensaver shot. So people are actively signing on. I would say one more minute or so and you'll be ready to go.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting momentarily. So it's 7:01. If you wanted to get started, Bob.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November 12th, 2020 meeting of the Tallahassee Historical Society. For those of you who might be attending for the first time, I'm Bob Holliday, President, and we are very glad that you are joining us. We hope that you will consider becoming a member. For more information about the Tallahassee Historical Society, including how to join, please visit our website with the imaginative name of TallahasseeHistoricalSociety.org. We had to struggle to come up with that one. Our program tonight is both timely and special, since we are in the aftermath of a presidential election that may or may not drag on for a while. You may be excused if you have been pounding your head against the wall all week or lying in a fetal position on the floor. In Florida, we have been here before. In the year 2000, when there was a vote difference of just a few hundred that devolved into a series of court challenges and PR opportunities that lasted 36 days. As I am speaking, you are seeing a few PowerPoint slides that I created from my stash of photographs from that election. Let me interject to say, by the way, that the Department of State conducted a flawless election last week so that we can look back on the events of 20 years ago and say with certainty about 2020 that it wasn't us. We have asked 3 people to join us tonight who played important roles in the 2000 election. Clerk of the Leon County Courts, Dave Lang, Circuit Judge Terry Lewis, and Supreme Court Justice Major Harding. I will introduce each one of them and ask them to recount their experiences from the election and what they think are the important lessons we should take. Each one of them will have approximately 15 minutes at the end of at the end of everyone's talk, we will throw it open to questions. So think of some hard ones. You can submit your questions through the Q&A feature. Let me remind you that if you are not able to attend our live meeting tonight, a recording of it will be posted at our YouTube channel. Ain't technology great? With that, let me introduce our first speaker. Dave Lang is a 6th generation Floridian. The first member of his family to arrive in Florida was his ancestral grandfather, Isaac Lang, who settled on the St. Mary's River in 1784. Dave doesn't like me to remind him of this, but Isaac was a Tory in the American Revolution who decided that it was better to move to Spanish Florida in the aftermath than to make peace with his neighbors. Probably a wise choice. His grandfather moved to Tallahassee in 1885. Dave was born in Gainesville and moved to Tallahassee in 1937. In 1955, he joined the Leon County Clerk of Circuit Court as deputy clerk and was later appointed clerk of the County Judges Court and chief deputy of the Florida Supreme Court. He remained in that position until 1973, when the Florida Constitution was revised to place all lower court clerks under the supervision of one clerk, the Clerk of Circuit. In 1992, he was elected clerk of the Circuit Court. Dave was looking forward to retirement in January of 2001, but something got in the way. The November 2000 presidential election. Fortunately, that was settled after 36 days, and he was able to proceed to his true avocation, which is president and board member of the Tallahassee Historical Society. Dave, I will turn this over to you.
Well, thank you, Bob, and welcome aboard, everybody. I hope you'll enjoy our program tonight. You know, back in 2000, the entire world had their eyes on little old Tallahassee, Florida in November and December of 2000. And everywhere you looked around this town, there were vans with satellite dishes on top. There were reporters, there were TV people running everywhere. And of course, there were protesters hither and yon. Our Florida Supreme Court got the brunt of it first, and then it gradually moved towards the circuit court. What I got involved with was the care and attention to the ballots that came to Tallahassee. And they were in number 1.1 million. They came from Dade County and from Palm Beach County. And but you know, the reporters were from all over the world. And at the time that I got involved, they were covering the Gore Bush trial that was held before Judge Sandy Sauls. That was broadcast worldwide, and we had reporters from England, Germany, Japan, you name it. They were here, and the atmosphere was like a circus. And both Terry and Judge, you all remember that with glee, I know. But the only thing it lacked was a midway marker. In fact, Smirnoff Vodka even threw a party for the world press and calling it the Smirnoff Vodka Campaign Recount Party. And so this town was just completely turned upside down. But it was an opportunity for my office to show that they could handle any situation that came up and do it right. and make our community proud. Some of the things we had to look into were, number one, where are we going to store all this 1.1 million ballots? Number two, the security of those ballots. And of course, we figured that the recount would be on the clerk's office. And I wanted to make sure that our staff was ready and had gotten training to do the recounts. So when we first learned about this, that it was Judge Sauls who announced on November the 11th that those folks were to pack them up and move them out. And that gave me a little leeway because the ballots didn't arrive here until November the 30th and December the 1st. During that time, I had to find a place to store those ballots. I had to find a security for those ballots and get my staff ready for the job. Not only that, wanted to pick out a place that would be suitable to do the counting because we had an entourage of press, TV, news, whatever, that was huge and they wanted to be close to it. So that's where we started. It was a great time for me to leave public service after nearly 42 years with the courts. And I felt the way that my staff did their job, that they did it in an exemplary manner. And that was the way I wanted to leave office. It was like putting icing on the cake. So, you know, the clerk's office is an elective office and we wear many hats. We're involved in so many functions. For example, we're clerk to both the circuit and the county court. We're the county controller, that is a finance officer. We're the county auditor. We're clerk to the board of county commissioners. We do jury management, marriages. We're the county recorder of all the court records and their deeds and mortgages and what have you. So the clerk's office is really a historical treasure trove. So you can see that, for example, my finance department, of the 188 people I had on staff, 25 of those were in the finance department. But they all took a place in this recount. And with the help of our, you know, with the oversight of our judges, and we were ready. So it was quite an experience for all of us. And we really got a lot out of it and loved it. Now, what happened really on Thursday, the 30th of November of 2000, a yellow rider truck came barreling down Appalachia Parkway, escorted by motorcycle policemen, and their sirens were blaring, their blue lights were flashing, and it contained 462,000 ballots from Palm Beach County, and it came straight to the courthouse. The next day, a second convoy arrived from Miami-Dade with 653,000 ballots on board. Now, we were looking at maybe having to count 1.1 million votes or a lesser number. It was sort of like, well, I went to the dentist today, and it was sort of like having the dentist tell you, well, we're going to pull all your teeth, or we're just going to pull one or two. So it left us in suspense. Well, one of the first things I did back in the middle of November when Judge Saul said will be on the way shortly, was to get ready. Number one, I called Ian Sancho, who was supervisor of elections, and I said, Ian, come on down. I said, do you know what was in store for us? I said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want you by my side so that we can do a recount in a very exacting way. And so he came down, and I had already looked around the town for a place to store those ballots because my office didn't have any space for it. And I said, well, you know what? I've got room in my office. He said, it's a nice sized room, and it has one door and no windows. He said, let's take a look at it. So we did, and it really looked fine. So from then I went to Larry Campbell, who was sheriff at the time. I said, Larry, how about giving us a little bit of security here? And so he gave us round the clock security on that room. And I went to Judge George Reynolds. Judge Reynolds entered an order on security for the courthouse and for that room. And it worked out. I looked all over town for a location for a recount. Civic Center, National Guard, Armory, you name it. But really, there was one place that really stood out in my mind, and that was Leon County Courthouse. It had a lot of possibilities there. And, you know, for number one, it was owned by the city, but owned by the county.
Library.
Yeah, okay. It was a Leon County Library. And it was a secure location. It had good parking. Right in front of it, it had a beautiful park where the press could set up. And it just seemed ideal for that location. And so I went to Helen Moeller, who is the head librarian, and talked with her. And she had two large rooms that were off to itself and seemed to be a perfect location for us. So we settled on the Leon County Library. You know, early in the trial, Judge Sauls had kind of teased us with the idea of that either 1.1 million or less, and it really left us in suspense. But the employees in my office looked forward to it because they wanted to do the best they could, and that's exactly what they did. I was very proud of them, and they did an exemplary job, I thought. So, you know, we waited for our judges to get with us and give us some information. But that's where we were. And when it came time for the recount, by the way, when on the 4th of December, Judge Sandy Sauls entered his final judgment, and here's his final judgment. And he says that, ordered and judged, the plaintiffs Albert Gore Jr. and Joseph J. Lieberman shall take nothing by the action of the defendants, and they may go hence without day. So that meant that he had ruled against them, and immediately they filed a notice of appeal. By the time it was out of Judge Saul's mouth, it was downstairs in our office. So we went from there, and that's when Judge Terry Lewis came in. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they did a random pick on a judge to take it from there because Judge Sauls recused himself, put him out of the picture. And that's when one of our favorite judges, Judge Terry Lewis, came on board. So we went from there, and then we went on to the library and set up there. And lo and behold, that Friday night or that Friday afternoon, Judge Lewis calls, says, well, you know what? We're going to have all of, I believe it was 8 judges to come down there and be with you and get this thing rolling. We want to give you oversight. And I thought, man, that is just what I wanted to hear. So if we make a boo-boo, the judges will be there with us and they can keep us straight. So I was very elated to hear that. And it was again, it was icing on the cake for me. I can go further on this if you like, but we were just very, very pleased to have taken a part in this. The judicial end came from our judges, and we were basically housekeepers and trying to make those fellows happy and trying to make the world happy too. I had interviews with, people from TV from Germany, all over the place. And I was scheduled to go on board with Wolf Blitzer the Sunday morning after the U.S. Supreme Court called a halt to the balloting. But it was just an exciting time, and certainly exciting for our justices and for our circuit judges. Probably a little gut wrenching at times, but they held their ground and they did a beautiful job. Our courts did a remarkably wonderful job during that time, and I was simply proud to be with them and proud to be a part of this operation.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. I've got my own quick little story about all those ballots. On December the 1st, Marjorie and I were at St. John's Episcopal Church. We had just had our marriage blessed by the priests at St. John's.
Wow.
And we were in the big reception room there, and we both looked up, and here came the van. I think from Miami, carrying all those hundreds of thousands of ballots, driving right by the church. So we thought, what a way to get a marriage started. I'll put it that way. Our next speaker is Judge Terry Lewis, and what I remember most about Judge Lewis is that either before this or maybe even during this, he was signing books. He was signing because he had shortly before this published, I think, the first of his novels, Conflict of Interest. It wasn't too long before this anyway, and that's how I actually met him. He was signing books. Terry Lewis was a circuit judge in the Second Judicial Circuit from 1998 to 2019. He was a Leon County Court judge from 1989 to 1998. He received his JD with honors from FSU College of Law in 1976. His professional service and affiliations have included the Inns of Court, Justice Teaching Institute, Florida Court Education Council, the Committee on Trial Performances and Accountability, and the Supreme Court Committee on Jury Instruction in Civil Cases. Judge Lewis's professional awards include Judge of the Year, Florida Law-Related Education Association, 1993 and 2013, Judge Harvey Ford Leadership Award, 1996, and Trial Judge of the Year Award by the American Board of Trial Advocates, Tallahassee Chapter 2000. I could go on, but I suspect that I'd better turn it over to him. Judge Lewis.
Well, Bob, thank you for the plug for the book. Matter of fact, some of my colleagues suggested during this thing that I made a mistake by not having that book prominently.
I thought about bringing my copy and showing it.
Yeah, use it as, instead of the Bible to swear witnesses in, but I thought that'd be a little tacky. But before I start, let me say a couple of things about Dave Lang. First of all, he doesn't look a bit different than he did 20 years ago. Man is ageless.
Ugly clear to the bone.
And secondly, under Dave's leadership, my experience with the clerk's office was wonderful. All of his staff was always very attentive to the judges, and that speaks well for your leadership, Dave. Appreciate your service.
Thank you, Terry.
My involvement in the election centered around three cases primarily. One was a case in which certain counties were seeking injunctive relief against the Secretary of State. I was also involved in a case in which there were claimed irregularities about absentee ballots in Martin County, and I had a sister case was handled by Judge Clerk with the same kind of issues, same kind of facts as well. And then the third thing, as Dave mentioned, was after Judge Sauls recused himself on the election contest and the Supreme Court of Florida had sent it back for a statewide recount, that landed in my lap. But I'll start on election night. I was at the Tallahassee Bar Association meeting, and I was having a conversation with Marshall Cassidy, who was the executive director of the Florida Bar. And he said, you know, Terry, this election is going to be really, really close. I don't think we're going to know who the president is until a few days later. And I said, Marshall, no, it's going to be close, but these ballot machines are accurate and they're fast, and we'll know who won pretty soon. Well, as you all know, that prediction was completely wrong. And there was chaos after that with lawsuits being filed every few seconds, it seemed, down in South Florida, Palm Beach. You had butterfly ballots, all sorts of things that were being questioned. So I thought we were okay up here. Matter of fact, I was playing tennis on Sunday with a group of folks, and one of the guys asked me, he said, Terry, you think any of those cases will end up in Tallahassee? And I said, no. You know, they're having trouble down in South Florida, but our supervisor elections ran a good election. We don't have any issues here. So we're not going to see anything in Tallahassee. You can probably see a theme here. I was wrong again. That following day, I was in court handling a case, and the trial court administrator got my attention, called me off the bench and said, you got this case from Volusia County and maybe a couple other counties, and they want an injunction against the Secretary of State, who says they're not going to count the ballots if they're not received by a certain date. So had to very quickly get the lawyers together and had a hearing that day. I thought it's kind of interesting. The issue basically was one of statutory interpretation, because on the election code, there was one provision that said that if certain circumstances happen, counties had to do a recount. And that's what the Gore team had asked these counties to do. There was a provision, though, that said that the counties must have certify their results by a certain date, I think, which was a week after election day. And there was another provision that said the Secretary of State may, not shall, but may reject those votes if they weren't timely filed. And so the Secretary had basically told all those counties that if you don't get them in on time, I'm not going to count them. And so after hearing argument and looking at the law, I said, well, the statute gives the Secretary discretion, and she has to exercise that discretion, and she can't just say ahead of time, I'm not going to count it. She has to consider all the circumstances surrounding why the ballots would be late being certified. For example, there could be a hurricane, there could be a power outage, there could be any number of things that may justify the exercise of discretion in accepting them. So I ruled that way, thought that was going to be it. Maybe there'd be several days that they would get them. The Secretary would look at what the reasons were and maybe do it, but I was wrong again, because the Secretary right away sent letters to the county and said, give me your reasons why they won't be on time. And they sent back and told them, she said, that's not good enough. I'm going to certify the election without your votes. So within a couple of days, the people were back in my court again saying, Judge, you need to hold her in contempt of court. She hasn't obeyed your order. And I heard arguments again, asked if there was any testimony or evidence to be presented. Nothing was. So I took it under advisement. The next day issued a very short order, basically saying all I had told the Secretary that she must do is to exercise her discretion. I didn't tell her how she had to vote, and that wasn't my job, or not how to vote, but how to exercise her discretion, whether to accept the votes. I suggested in my order that if they thought that was an abuse of discretion, there was a remedy for the parties under the election code, which in my mind was a contest of the election, because if that affected the number of votes cast, it might have been a reason to have a recount. But again, I thought the Gore team and the counties would come back to me immediately and say, we'd like to amend our complaint, Judge, and ask to contest the election. I was wrong on that too. They immediately appealed, as Dave said, to the Florida Supreme Court. I watched in anticipation the oral argument before the court, which included my friend Major. And judging by the questions that were asked, I said, well, it looks like they're probably going to affirm me on appeal. At the very least, they'll send it back to me for further proceedings to gather facts and get a record. But I was wrong again, as the Florida Supreme Court in a unanimous 6-0 decision reversed me. My friend Major again later consoled me with the observation that, Terry, we're not last because we're right because we're last. So I took that in the spirit that it was intended, didn't take any umbrage by the fact that they reversed me. But so they basically gave the Secretary of State, or told the Secretary of State she must accept late returns if they were in by a certain date. They extended, I think, to the same date that overseas ballots were to be received. The Bush team immediately appealed that up to the U.S. Supreme Court. While that was going on, there were a couple other cases that were going on. But in between the time of my first ruling and the second ruling, I was the subject of a lot of media scrutiny. It was amazing. Friends and family members were deluged with phone calls. Hey, tell me about this guy. And there was, my picture was in the New York Times, and with big old picture of me, and everybody speculated. And that was one thing that started, and I think kept through the entire process, is commentators, pundits, whatever, would look at the various judges and justices involved. And the first they'd want to know is who appointed them. Were they a registered Democrat or Republican or independent, and made certain assumptions based upon whoever appointed them, whether they were Democrat or Republican. And it also let go a floodgate of people who were very free in their advice to me by sending me emails or sending me faxes or letters, whatever, telling me how I should rule, which I, of course, put over to the side. But it was an interesting time. And I know that Judge Clerk, who was involved later in the Seminole County case, got a lot of nasty cards, and actually physically threatening cards. I didn't get much of that. I got a little bit of that. My favorite one was the one from a lady in Kentucky who said, "You are one handsome man," which I told my wife we should keep definitely in the scrapbook. If you'll recall, that was the time around the 1st of December, 3rd or something, was the FSU University of Florida game. And as Dave mentioned, there were a lot of people in town. Boy, they were kicked out of their hotel rooms for people who had reserved rooms for that game. And I remember my wife and I were walking through the parking lot going to attend the game. And I saw this guy sort of in the distance peripherally who was kind of looking at me, and I'm getting a little nervous because, there are a lot of crazies out there. And so he starts coming towards me, loping, almost running towards me. And I'm going, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And when he gets closer, I recognize him. He stops right in front of me. I think he'd had a little too much to drink that night, little tailgating before the game. Terry Lewis. And he was my neighbor from Perry, where I grew up with. And he said, "I just knew this case would come through to Taylor County somehow," and wouldn't let me go for a while. But that was probably one of the interesting events of that entire time. But at any rate, the next case I was involved with was the Martin County case, which involved the question of absentee ballots. And Judge Clerk had the sister case. We both conferred and said, let's see if we can get together and compare notes and see if we come to the same conclusion, which would be better. If not, we could at least distinguish our cases and why we were disagreeing with each other. As it turned out, we both agreed that the law, which had recently been confirmed by the Florida Supreme Court, directed that even though there were some irregularities, there was nothing that really affected the counting of the votes or the people's ability to vote. So I thought that was going to be a sleeper, but it turned out not to be. And yes, I think it was the following Friday, I heard that the Florida Supreme Court had ruled on the appeal from Judge Salz's order and had ordered a statewide recount. And then I got the message, well, Judge Salz is recusing himself. He's not going to do it. Then I got the message that said, Judge Clerk says she's not available. She's at home and not able to do it. So that's how that ended up on my desk again. I conferred with some of the judges, with the clerk and with the supervisor of elections. I set a case management conference for the lawyers to give me their input, and decided, interpreting what the Florida Supreme Court had said, how we would go about it. And so I made the mistake of giving out our fax number, though, on national TV. So every crank in the world promptly sent me advice through fax as to what to do. And I got a fake order from the U.S. Supreme Court saying, stop the vote, stop the recount immediately, things like that. But as it turned out, it was Saturday morning or close to noon, perhaps. I got the message that the U.S. Supreme Court had stayed the recount. It looked to me as if we might meet the deadline I had set of Sunday at 3 p.m. to have all the recounted votes in. But it was real tight time-wise, and I think and I recall Major Harding, who had dissented from the recount decision, basically quoted Vince Lombardi, who said, "We didn't lose, we just ran out of time," which I thought was probably correct. It was difficult to do all that and have enough time for everybody to be heard on appeals to get up that. But one thing that struck me, we said, well, what do you take out of that when all the dust had settled and you look back over it? And it seems to me that it just reaffirmed in my mind the fact that most people are more concerned with result than they are process. If they like the result, they think it was fair. If they don't like the result, they think it was unfair. And there was the beginning, a lot of, I think, uncalled for criticism of judges and courts who are just trying to do their job. And I think this is the beginning of what has gradually increased to a way of just, I think, constant criticism of some of the institutions in our democracy, which is a dangerous thing. And I think as of today, it's gotten very dangerous. And we need to, if we're going to have freedom, if we're going to have democracy, we better fight for it. So thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Judge Lewis. We'll get back to you with questions, I'm sure, shortly. I probably shouldn't say this, but I will, because nothing stops me. But one of the events that made me realize how really important this was back in 2000 came several years later when Major Harding gave a talk at our church. We go to the same church, and he was talking about this period, and he was talking about how he lost friends over this, how he got emails and so forth from people, and that they essentially would not forgive him for the court making the rulings that it made. And that struck me very hard. I mean, that was a very serious thing to me. And so I'd like to echo what Judge Lewis just said about all of our institutions have been under attack for some time, but you can't have a democracy without institutions, and you've got to have a certain amount of regard for them. You just do. With that, Major B. Harding was the 74th justice to serve on the Florida Supreme Court. He served from 1991 to 2002. He was appointed by Governor Lawton Childs. He's a native of Charlotte, North Carolina. He did his undergraduate work at Wake Forest University, and we're always talking about Wake Forest football as opposed to Vanderbilt football. And he got his JD from the University of Virginia. He has received an honorary Doctor of Laws degrees from Stetson University and from Florida Coastal School of Law. And I've got 3 pages here of stuff I could read, but he probably doesn't want me to, and I think I ought to turn it over to him. So Major.
Thank you very much, Bob. I got my law degree from Wake Forest. I got a master's degree from the University of Virginia in judicial process. But in any event, it's a pleasure to be here, and especially with my friends, Dave Lang and Terry Lewis. And it's a fun time in many respects to remember 20 years ago and what happened then, and hopefully that it won't happen again. But nonetheless, some of the memories I have not necessarily been about the legal issues involved, but I will touch on those. But as I've thought back over the time in preparation for this and other presentations, I could not help but marvel at the work that was done inside the court by Tom Hall, the clerk of the court, by Craig Waters, the public information officer, and by Wilson Barnes, the marshal of the court. And each of them, in a very special way, contributed to the orderly manner in which this case was ultimately decided and the issues were ultimately resolved. When it became known in the news about the butterfly ballots and the hanging chads, and then the litigation was starting down in the south part of the state, our Chief Justice went to Tom Hall and asked him if he would ask the clerks of those courts down there to send the pleadings that were filed in their cases to us, because we knew that it would ultimately come to us, and ultimately it would be helpful for us to sort of get an idea of what the issues were and what the cases were about. Tom Hall did that, and that started an interesting phenomenon that actually the election of 2000 sort of birthed, and that is the emailing or e-filing of pleadings in the courts. His initial request, as I recall, was for the clerks of those courts that were getting those cases to fax their pleadings to the Supreme Court. Well, as those cases multiplied, the faxing of those, that became very difficult. And so then I think he went to email and said, if you could email it to us. Well, when they came to the clerk's office, they were copied and sent around to the justices for their review and trying to figure out what the issues were. And all of that to say is that ultimately the progress that was made during the course of the election in the filing and emailing and distribution of court documents to the public and that was one of the issues that Wilson Barnes, the marshal, and the clerk had to resolve because of the security issues with all of the public, all the people out front, the saucers on top of trucks and everything, and the press hanging on the steps of the courthouse. It was important that nobody have access to inside the court building, and yet they wanted to have information from the clerk's office of filings that were made there. So with the ability to distribute these pleadings, it was remarkable to me, the work that was done by Tom Hall in getting that done. And of course, that ultimately worked into what now exists statewide, and you don't use paper in the courts anymore. You use e-filing of all documents, and that's the way that it is. And then also Craig Waters was very helpful in going about getting the cases, the decisions that were made in the cases to the public. And he would go out on the front steps of the courthouse and make a public announcement. And they would pass out printed copies of the decisions of the court, but also he would tell them how they could get the documents through the online, and that was a remarkable way of preventing the entry into the courthouse, and also in preventing extra work in printing copies and having them faxed or emailed to other places. Another remarkable thing that they did was for the oral arguments. And of course, there were hundreds and hundreds of people out in front of the Supreme Court. And the question was, how are we going to keep the Supreme Court oral arguments from being attended totally by the press? And so the Marshal and Craig Waters developed a system where they gave out press cards to the press. Excuse me, they gave cards to the press, and the press people came and dropped their cards into a box, and I don't know the number of people that were permitted, but they drew the names out of the box, and those that were named were able to come into the courtroom for the oral argument. And it was also remarkable that we had, for several years before the 2000 election, been able to broadcast our oral arguments. And the broadcast of those oral arguments in the 2000 election was remarkable. And I had a friend in Africa, I had one in the Philippines, and another one, I think, in South America, who wrote to me and said that they had watched the oral arguments on television or their computer at that time. And then Tom Hall did a remarkable job, particularly in the last case that we decided, I think, on December the 8th. And that was a Friday. On December the 9th, the Supreme Court of the United States took the case and asked for the record to be delivered to the Supreme Court of the United States the next day. And Tom Hall went and tried to find an overnight deliverer, but it was all too close to closing and he couldn't find one. So he found a state plane, and he was able to get on a state plane with the record from our case and get it to the Supreme Court the next day. And if my memory, that would have been the 10th. They heard the case on the 11th and delivered their decision reversing the majority of our court decision granting recounts statewide. And December the 12th was the date that that had to be over according to federal law. And so Tom Hall did a remarkable job getting the record to the Supreme Court. And Dave, the thing that I think he regretted the most was that the Supreme Court of the United States did not ask for the ballots that had been stored in our clerk's office at the Supreme Court, requiring around-the-clock security, as you have indicated. And but he was gracious in in doing what he did. But as Terry has indicated, we got these cases after they had come from South Florida, and then they all seemed to go up to Terry and Judge Sauls and others because the Secretary of State was named as the respondent or defendant in the cases. And it was just remarkable how quickly the trial attorneys, the trial judges were able to get the cases resolved and to us in a timely manner. And so that hopefully it could be done in the time that was required. I hated to reverse my friend Terry on the first case that came over, but he was vindicated with a reversal of our decision by the Supreme Court of the United States. Correct, Terry? And then the last case, our court with a majority of 4 granted a statewide recount, and 3 of the judges dissented. And it was in that case that I was quoted that we didn't win or lose, we just ran out of time, and it was over. But as we have looked back, or as I've looked back over the past 20 years, and particularly as related to the most recent election, I could not help but think of how well Florida did in this most recent election, and also the accolades that went to Florida by the media for having done it so well and so quickly and so efficiently. And so we are truly blessed to be here with this system. There is a lot more, but I just think it is important to look back at our history and to think that how those things help to build the confidence that we have in our system today.
Thank you, Major. I'd actually like to start off the questioning myself, and then throw it open for questions. And you may not be able to answer any of these, or may not want to answer any of these. But my first question is for Major, and then my second question is for both Major and Judge Lewis. And I've always wondered, Major, particularly in that second decision, that 4-3 decision on the court, how was the collegiality among the justices? I mean, was everything just normal, or were you guys at each other's throats going, no, no, no? I mean, how did that work?
No, it's a remarkable. One of let me give you an indication first of the first case that went to the Supreme Court. We sat around, we had different views, but we sat around the table in the conference room and really worked out that opinion to the satisfaction of all of the justices to agree. Now, when it comes time to disagree, you still maintain, at least we did, and while I was there, the same collegiality, and rather than expressing anger or hostility, many times we would laugh or joke or anything of that nature about it. But you can't have a multi-staffed, multi-member court and expect them to all agree on everything all the time. And I've always, one of the happy memories of my 11 years on the Supreme Court was the collegiality that existed even when there were people who disagreed.
My other question, and this is for both of the judges. Can you all comment? Do you feel comfortable commenting even after 20 years on the quality of the legal teams for either side? I mean, you had Barry Richards for the Bush team, you had Dexter Douglas, and you had some really high class legal talent involved in here. Is there anything either of you all would like to say about that?
Terry, go ahead, and
well,
I'll affirm you or reverse you.
that sounds like a good way to do it. I thought the lawyering was exceptional, very professional. The lawyers agreed to facilitate. I think, as Major had alluded to earlier, they did everything quickly, efficiently. They were aware that there was a time constraint, so they got the issues to you. They got you the law to you. You could rule. They took the appeal and got the briefs done. And I think, all in all, I was very impressed with the way. I mean, they basically handled about 10 years of litigation in 30 days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I concur. The lawyers were phenomenal in presenting the issues and the arguments, and they were very helpful, we felt, in the decision-making process.
Mary Ellen, should I turn this over to you about any questions out there? I hope.
Bob, I'll handle questions.
Oh, Brendan, you're handling question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a couple of questions. We'll start with, for any of the speakers, do you think the U.S. Supreme Court should get involved in deciding the result of national elections? Why or why not?
Ooh.
Well, let me say that I don't know whether should is the best word to say, but a court, all the time that I was on the court, many of the times that I was on the court, I had to rule on decisions that had been made by other members of the government, the governor, Secretary of State, and it, I think that it is very hard to characterize the court and not very appropriate to try to characterize the decisions of the court as being political or favoring a political candidate. I had the opportunity, excuse me, to rule against Lawton Childs, who appointed me to the Supreme Court in the override of a veto issue. And, you know, you don't enjoy doing that, but nonetheless, if the law compels you to do it, you have to do it. So I don't know whether it should or not, but I think it would be very difficult for these decisions that have to be made by courts not to be made by a Supreme Court. Terry?
Well, actually, that was another one of my predictions I got wrong during the 2000 election process. People ask, you think the Supreme Court's going to take this case? And I said, no, they don't usually get involved. This is usually a state issue, and I doubt they'll get involved, but obviously that was wrong. They will get involved if there's a federal constitutional issue, which, you know, that's in the eye of the beholder, but obviously the courts did. And as Major suggests, reasonable people can disagree in good faith about a certain, whether the law applies in a certain situation or not and how it should apply. So you do have to take that for what it's worth. Yeah, I agree, should or should not. I guess it depends on the case, on the facts and the legal issue that's raised.
Right.
Okay, our next question is from George. How did or who arrived at the point whereby there was only 500 plus votes separating the two candidates? Do you think a recount would have made a difference?
You want me, I think I can take a stab at how it ended up that way. Is under the Florida law, there was an automatic recount because the vote was close enough. Originally, the count was 1,200. Then they did the manual recount, and that's how they ended up, not a manual recount, but they did a machine recount, came up with 537. And they said, well, so that got the Gore team thinking, well, maybe it would make a difference. Whether it would or would not, we will never know. I know that a lot of news organizations tried to do a recount of the ballots, and I don't think they ever came up with a conclusive determination. I think if you took a perspective of how the Gore team wanted them to be counted, Bush won. If you count them the way Bush thought they should be counted, Gore won. So that's a question I don't know that we'll ever have an answer to, but it could certainly have made a difference.
I agree.
Okay, our next question is from Laurel. Judge Lewis touched on the notion that sometimes people are more interested in outcome than process, to the detriment of our democratic process. This seems even more true today. Any advice for today's public servants on how to inspire confidence in our courts, our elections, and similar institutions?
Well, basically, as I've said before, don't characterize every decision by the court as being a political decision, and make it a decision on the law and not on politics. Terry?
Well, yeah, I think two things in terms of speaking in courts, in terms of public confidence and trust in the courts, two-way street. We depend a lot on good citizens to support the courts, and the notion of the idea of a court being fair and impartial and making a decision based on the law, basically giving the courts the benefit of the doubt that that's what they're doing. And number two, and judges, I think the most important thing we can do is to explain our decisions and explain it in a way that's understandable to whatever the audience is. In a case like this, you have a very large audience. Sometimes it's just the litigants in front of you, but every time you should explain it, for example, you're going to lose and here's why. And at least you would think that if you do that, people may disagree, but at least they understand how you came to your decision. If it's somewhat logical, they say, okay, well, I disagree, but I understand why they decided the way they did.
The importance of a decision maker to make people think they have been heard and that the decision maker is listening is significant. Terry has been involved in the judicial education process, and we have a class on listening, don't we, in the judicial education process. And it is very important. And people walk away with a decision that is opposed to them, and they feel like they have been heard, and they're more willing to abide by and accept the decision.
Yeah, I'll give you a little anecdote that goes along with that to show the opposite side of that we do with judges. And everybody's seen People's Court, right? You know,
It is.
Judge Wapner or whoever it is now. And so they did a study in Florida and in North Carolina of people in small claims court, interviewing when they came out, real people in real cases. And there was this one lady in a case, and she was a small case, about $10,000. She was foreclosing on a lot or something. And she came in, well, she was there, but the other side wasn't present. So when the other side's not there in small claims court, the judge enters a default final judgment in favor of the plaintiff. And that's what the judge did, default final judgment in favor of the plaintiff. She walked out and the guy asked her, says, well, ma'am, what'd you think of the judge's decision? I didn't like it one little bit. What? He didn't want to hear a thing I had to say. And so, the lesson is it takes just a little bit of time well, ma'am, I see that you're here with all your exhibits and your charts, and you understand the defendant's not there, so he must have been afraid that you would win the case. He's not there, you win, but we don't have a trial. And they'll go, oh, okay. They feel a little better about it, but it's so easy to either build or destroy trust and confidence in the way you handle a case, as Major says.
Don't you all think, particularly at the federal level, that one reason that the federal courts, and I guess I'm thinking particularly the US Supreme Court, has become controversial sort of in spite of itself, is that there are lots of people out there who feel that the federal courts try to resolve what are essentially political questions judicially, so that the political system, which is sort of built for compromise, once a controversy gets into the courts, it's almost like an either or decision. So if you're on the losing side, you not only have lost, but the feeling is that you've kind of been delegitimized, if that makes any sense. And I mean, I think that's part of it. I mean, that's not the only thing, I guess, but I'm particularly thinking about the federal courts in a situation like that.
Major?
I don't have anything further.
Yeah, just a thought.
All right. Our next question. Thank you for the fascinating memories. It was documented that over 20,000 votes were thrown out in Miami-Dade County alone. Since many of these votes were of African-American voters and Democrats, did issues of race and racism enter the judges in these cases, particularly since Bush went on to win by 537 votes? Thank you for taking my question.
Major?
Jerry, I don't remember the issue of race being raised in our court.
Nor do I, and I don't remember any account of 20,000 ballots being lost or destroyed.
All right, we'll move on to our next question from Lynn. How did the voting in both the Florida Supreme Court rulings and the U.S. Supreme Court rulings reflect the political party of the governor or the president who nominated the respective judge?
Yeah, boy.
I don't know that we would have time for me to think that through.
Yeah, I think.
I know, Terry, wait a minute. I do know that I cast a vote in the court against a candidate that I voted for.
Yeah.
And so
You alluded to it earlier that most of the time people want to say that it's political, but it generally is not. And I said people who are diehard partisans, it's like people who are invertebrate liars. They think everybody lies because they do. And if you're a diehard partisan, you think everybody's partisan. But a judge's job is not to be partisan. It's specifically not to. That being said, none of us can look at a particular situation with any eyes except our own. And we come to it with all our experiences, our faith, our institutions we belong to, our how we were brought up, all that stuff lends it to it. But I don't think it's, that was probably one of the more irritating things of this when I went through it, when they say, oh yeah, well, he was appointed by a Republican governor, we know what he's going to do. As a matter of fact, I got so much, they were on me starting at the beginning, but when I ruled the second time and said Secretary Harris had exercised her discretion, wasn't going to hold her in contempt. Oh boy, a lot of people thought I was just great because they had assumed I was appointed by Lawton Childs as well. They had assumed I would support and rule in favor of the Democrats. And so, well, he must have integrity. He ruled the other way. It wouldn't have made a difference either way, from my perspective. But so that's always annoying for judges, I think, a pet peeve. But I don't think, even though I disagree with the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in this case, I don't think it was politically motivated. I just think they got it wrong. That's just my opinion.
All right, and our last question, how do we overcome the increasing politicization of courts?
Get off of social media.
I was going to ask, aren't you all glad you didn't have social media back 20 years ago? Or at
Very,
least much
very
of it?
happy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a tough question, and I wish I knew the answer to it. But you know, it's one step at a time. We didn't get there overnight. Like I said, I think the 2000 election was the beginning of a continuum of
I agree.
Yeah.
increasing politicization or increasing extremism on both sides of the aisle. And I think we just have to, person by person, begin to reach across and in good faith say, as Joe Biden recently said, we're not enemies, we're Americans. And that's the kind of mindset we're just going to have to encourage with all our friends and acquaintances.
Right. I agree. And I think also it brings back the importance of having young people taught history.
Amen.
I feel that our young people do not know the history of our country in a manner that to the extent that they feel they need to protect it.
Well said, Major. I think you've hit the key right there.
Well,
And
it's
I
nice
didn't
to be
bribe him to
affirmed.
say that.
It's nice to be affirmed, Dave. Thank you.
I didn't even have to bribe him to say that. Are there any other questions?
We have one more that just popped up from Matt. Is it not time for the U.S. to enact standardization in our elections so that we all use the same process, same ballot counting machine, same rules for vote by mail, same deadlines, etc.? It seems every election cycle there are problems somewhere in the U.S.
Dave, you got the answer?
No, I've got something I've got to go get, and I'll be right back.
Well, all right.
Well, I don't know whether the Constitution permits the federal government to do that, but it would be a good idea if it was all done like Florida did it.
From an efficiency standpoint, that'd be good. I think the Constitution would have to be amended to take away the authority of the states to decide how they select their electors to the Electoral College. I think the idea is that states should learn from each other. So yeah, they should say, well, you know, why don't we count the mail-in votes before the election day? Then we don't have to worry about this, like Florida did. And
Right on.
slow and sloppy process, but that's, I think, what we have to do at this point.
Thank you.
Is that all, Brendan?
I'm back.
Yeah, it looks like that's all we have.
All right, Dave is back. Does Dave have something there? Oh, look at that. Show it
Okay,
now.
folks. This is an old Leon County ballot box. And as you can see, the slot here, this was, they were throwing them out back in the 1960s. And I happened to be there when it took place. It still has the lock on it. And I thought it'd be a wonderful keepsake. I've never had that lock open, but this is a memento that I'll always hang on to. And this is what keeps our country free, is the ballots by the public.
Are there 537 votes in that, you think?
Well, there's some papers in here, but I've never opened it to see what it was. It's still a mystery.
When would that have been used? How old is that? When would that have been used?
Oh, probably at least 100 years ago.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Probably very efficient.
Yep. But that's the way our country has risen by secret ballot, and I hope it always stays that way.
Well,
Amen.
are there any further questions out there? Any further comments or questions from our attendees tonight?
Thank you.
Thank everyone. Thank everyone for attending tonight. Thank you especially to our three panelists here. I trust that our current election controversy will end as peacefully as the last one did. at least we hope so. We normally give our participants in our historical society meetings the official Tallahassee Historical Society travel mug, and I have those, and I will get them to our participants as soon as I can. As soon as we can figure. As soon as I can figure a way in our pandemic times to do it with masks. But I will email everyone and tell them that we have your official Tallahassee Historical Society travel mug as a thank you for your participation tonight.
Thank
It was,
you.
it was my pleasure.
Thank you so much. This was very educational. Next, I will say this as we close. Our next Tallahassee Historical Society meeting will be Thursday night, December the 10th. Our speaker will be Professor James M. Denham from Florida Southern University. Speaking of Lawton Childs, he's head of the Lawton Childs History Center down there, and he's an author of a biography of William Pope Duval. So I think it'll be a very good show with Mike, and I hope everybody will attend. So having said that, thank you all very much, and I will proceed to leave these proceedings. And
All right.
I
Thank you,
think
Val.
we should log out. Thank you all very
Good
much.
night.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
As you, Terry, been great to be with you. Thank you. Bob.
Likewise. Likewise.
Sandra got on, I don't know, the kids got on, Sandra heard your part, so.
Uh-huh.
Did you end it?
Mm-mm.